Hi, my name is Ted Kim, and I am the senior pastor of the Evanston Vineyard, and I am a novice in the order. And Jared has asked me to say a few words about the practice of simplicity, especially as it relates to technology. Now, before we begin, I just want you to know that this is something that I'm very present to, and also I'm not a Luddite. I have a watch, I have a phone, I have an iPad, and more than that, I'm convinced of the power of these little devices to help me live a good life. So, revisiting the section on this practice in the Rule of Life we read, we don't regard technology as good or bad. A great deal of technology allows for life, while some life is choked out by our gadgets and our addiction to them. Our commitment to simplicity carries with it a commitment to open-handedness with regard to the technology we engage with. We seek to be indifferent with regard to technology. That is, we're not striving to be countercultural for its own sake or against technology. However, we recognize simply that our relationship with technology is itself not a neutral relationship. All technology forms us in deep and crucial ways, especially when we aren't intentional about how it forms us. We aim to engage in conversations that seriously consider what is and isn't best for our lives and relationships. Two things that I'd like to draw our attention to: relationship with technology and its description, not neutral. So how can we have a relationship with technology? Isn't technology just an instrument? Isn't it something that we can wield or bend toward our own ends? I want to argue not quite. I want to argue that the word relationship is not just another way to say we relate to something, or we relate to like a thing, like as we relate to technology. I actually want to argue that we have a relationship with it in the same way that we might with a person. And look, we've all read the studies. We've all heard about the studies. Technology changes our ability to process, our ability to engage, our ability to hold attention in the moment, and usually not for the better. But even more than that, technology doesn't just distract us. Technology doesn't just change the way that we think. I think that technology exerts control over us. It compels us. The flickering screen beckons to us. In other words, technology, I want to say, commands our loves. Technology commands our loves just as, or maybe more easily than a person might, and thus we have a relationship with it, and thus that relationship is not neutral. St. Augustine taught us that at the core of formation is the right ordering of our loves. He tells us that loving rightly is to love things, that is to say, in the right order, so that you do not love what is not to be loved, or fail to love what is to be loved, or have a greater love for what should be loved less, or an equal love for things that should be loved less or more, or a lesser or greater love for things that should be loved equally. In other words, give each thing the love that is due. And of course, Augustine and Jesus affirmed that the first love, the most important love, the one that takes the highest priority, is loving God, who has loved us first. See, the danger of technology is that it can disorder our loves. It can occupy a more primary spot than it should, even supplanting the Lord of love. And as C.S. Lewis tells us, anything good that is disordered in its relationship to us or our relationship to it might become a demon. You take any good, beautiful thing and place it above the love of God, and it can become monstrous. Either it's in its right spot and in right relationship to the love of God, and it's either in that right spot, in right relationship with the love of God, and so then it becomes doxological, or it's not, and it becomes apostate. And so what's in view here with technology is how we order technology, or rightly order our relationship with it, as we seek to be formed to Jesus and have rightly ordered loves. That's what's in view here. And so what I want to say is that in order to rightly order our relationship with technology, we need to get present to the ends for which we use it. We need to get intentional about our why. Why do we use it? Why do we pick it up? But I want to say that this is very hard to do. In our culture today, the ends are hardly in view, especially when it comes to technology. In fact, you could even say that a lot of people, many people, even people that we know, would call technology an end in and of itself, and in so doing make technology like an organizing principle of their life. It might actually be true that the organizing principle of many people is getting the next piece of technology. And why? Because everything is all about being more useful, or more successful, or faster, or more efficient. These aren't ends at all, by the way. These are just another way of describing how we do something. These are means. And this is the problem of our age, or the problem of modern civilization, as Jacques Ellul tells us. He writes that today, everything has become means. There's no longer an end. We don't know whither we are going. He goes on to say that we have become so bound up in means that ends have become implicit and abstract. And here's the bad news about implicit and abstract ends. When ends become implicit and abstract, according to Ellul, and according to some of my experience, we tend to ignore the ends or assume that we've got the right ones, which is exactly what happens with technology. Everything has become technological, and thus everything has become means. And then what ends up happening is we get really uncareful about these implicit and abstract ends, assuming that we've got the right ones, and our lack of care, getting uncareful, as I say, we succumb to doom scrolling Instagram or the wanton use of some streaming service. We unwittingly habituate ourselves to an implicit end that we are not present to, and then technology oozes its way up the ladder of our lives, distorting our relationships, and then pointing our lives away from the flourishing that God intends for us. So our invitation is to not make those ends implicit, to get present to them, to get present to the ends for which we use our technology, to get present to that end, and thus make technology serve the most glorious beginning and end of all things, the Lord of life, who loves us so very much. And so here's the invitation. Number one, would you index your technological habits? Would you just take stock of your daily life, maybe over this next week? What you habitually do as it relates to the devices in your life. Maybe one of your habits is to watch a YouTube video or to watch Netflix while you're doing the dishes. Perhaps another one of your habits is to look at your phone right before you go to bed. And don't judge these habits, just make record of them. And then after you've done that for a bit, look at your habits. Take one of them, perhaps it's Instagram or Facebook or something else. Or maybe it's your habit of looking at your phone first thing in the morning when you wake up. Just take those habits and then take the time to prayerfully consider the end to which you do that habit. Take time to prayerfully consider the answer to this question. I do X habit for this reason, blank. Consider the ends to which you are engaging this habit, and be vulnerable and be honest. Get present to them. Just begin to articulate them. Why do you do them? Why do you do it? Friends, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, and the Spirit helping us in our weakness helps us get present to our why. I believe that the Spirit wants to do that for us. And the interesting thing is that often getting present to the why is enough to relegate these devices to their proper priority. Getting present to the why doesn't obviate our use for technology. Getting present to the why is an invitation into the freedom of God and these things. And this is what we want for all of us, to be free.